everyone. Welcome to Save the Date, your dating survival guide from Coffee Meets Bagel. I'm your host, Daun, and CMB's Chief Dating Officer. Each episode, I invite a dating expert to explore what it takes to go on better dates and ultimately find a great relationship. So, the other day, I was walking around downtown, and guess what I saw? It's crazy. I saw holiday decorations, which to me is like, oh my God, is it already that time of the year? And did you guys know that there are only 7 weeks left to 2020? I find that really shocking that the year end just crept up. I think 2020 was a really challenging year for every one of us, really universally and globally. So in a way that I'm glad it's coming to an end. But holiday season and year-end timing also brings up, another set of challenges for, I think, us daters. I remember when I was dating, holiday seasons meant colder weather and shorter days, which meant I was staying home more, being alone more. I was being invited to family and friends gathering, which of course reminded me of how single I was. And even though it's not factually correct, it really did feel like everywhere I turned to, everyone else I know was paired up or in a relationship or starting a family or doing whatever while I was still alone. And so I think that can be really challenging for that kind of sentiment can be really challenging for a lot of us. And if you're feeling that way as well, you're not alone. 61% of CMB daters have told us that this time of the year, holiday season, actually makes them think more about dating. So how do we navigate dating during the holiday season and make sure that we are in a great mental state of mind, whether it's when we're going on a date or whether it's we are, going to a family gathering or whether it's when we're, on our own by ourselves, at our place. So here to help me answer this question is Dr. Mariel Buquè. I am so excited to have her here. Dr. Mariel Buquè is a Columbia University trained psychologist, therapist, and sound bath meditation healer. I think that is so freaking cool. Sound bath meditation healer. Her work as a therapist and professor centers around healing wounds of intergenerational trauma and mending relationships that have been disrupted by emotional pain. I think a lot of us can relate to that. She has developed a program called Soul Healing Collective, where she helps people to develop a mind, body, spirit practice to help heal emotional wounds. Mariel, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. It's such a pleasure, to be with you all and in a community of lovebirds and also during a season that really reminds us all about love.
Yeah. How are you feeling now that it's already kind of like Thanksgiving coming up? It's a holiday season. How are you feeling about that?
Well, I'm bracing myself for, what the rest of 2020 has to offer us. I think with the rest of probably the world, right? And in addition to that, just looking to see how we can embrace this holiday season in this very new way, right? I think there's going to be a lot of creativity that's going to flow out of this holiday season, and also just a segue into winter, right? Because I think there's some preparation that people need to do in terms of that, just like mentally preparing, physically preparing the home, for installation and things like that. So there's a lot that just kind of needs to happen as we gear for this season, and I think I'm right along there with everybody else and trying to prepare myself.
Yeah, I love that. I think this year has been so challenging for a lot of us. It's easy to kind of focus on the negative. Oh my God, it's still COVID and now it's going to be an uprise and I'm going to feel more isolated because it's harder to connect. Like that's kind of where my mind was going to. But I love what you said, which is, well, it doesn't have to be that way. It is a different way. And how can we use creativity to actually really prepare, embrace this time? I really love that. What was your experience like when you were dating as a dater during this time of the year?
Well, it actually felt a little sad. Because it kind of reminds you of the fact that you may not be partnered, right? So when I was single, there was always the and I am still single. I'm single again, right? But it feels very different, and I can speak to that piece. But back in the day when I was single, it felt like, oh man, the dreaded family interaction or friend interactions where everybody's going to ask you, so who are you bringing to the gathering, or you're showing
right.
up your own and everyone's partnered, and the ball drops and that's the moment you kiss and, you're like, okay, I'm just here, just doing my thing, and it's super awkward. There's just so much, about that also elicits a lot of sadness, and a lot of this
right.
existential dread in people, where sometimes people really even opt to not go to gatherings for the sake of staying, right? That was never really my case. I still went and, try to have a good time, but it didn't take away the sting of getting those questions. What happened to that person? Or, hey, so with such and such, and, you're kind of getting older, so, are you going to think about settling down? And those very pressure-filled questions that make it that our emotions just start heightening up during the holidays. It can be really tricky.
Yeah, I am so glad that, somebody like you who is an expert professional mental professional, felt that sadness and those emotions as well. I had my fair share of that. How can we help our daters navigate through those emotions during this time of the year?
Well, I think it's people, because we have never really been conditioned otherwise. We tend to just kind of go about these holidays and the situations that we encounter within the holiday season in this autopilot mode, right? We just go, ask the questions, and we react rather than kind of preemptively preparing ourselves, doing what we call in the mental health world coping ahead, for the holiday season, or coping ahead for an actual gathering or interaction that you are likely to have with people that may pop that question, right? And so it can be really important to take a moment for yourself to engage in some self-reflection, potentially engage in some journaling about what this season feels like for you and what this experience of sadness or frustration or anguish or anxiety might feel like for you, and really kind of navigate your own emotional world before tossing yourself into the holiday season and then getting slammed in the face with a bunch of stuff, right? You're kind of building up your armor, so that you can be prepared and grounded and feel well, where you are in your experience, whether you're single, married, or anywhere in between that spectrum, just so that you can understand where you are and be well within that and feel okay with where you are. And even, a practice that can be really healthy and probably even also prepare you for the anxieties that may come is being able to actually ask the questions that people may ask you and maybe answer them yourself, in writing, right?
Oh, cool. So then I would so then I would journal, maybe kind of express how I'm feeling. And I can kind of see, I've never done that. I love this approach of proactively addressing. I can kind of see how that could be almost cathartic, in a way. And then I could, like you're saying, write down, okay, they're going to ask me, why are you still single? They're going to ask me, are you dating anyone?
Yeah.
And then I kind of anticipate what I would say.
Exactly. You would anticipate what you would say. You would write it down. You would recite it, right? So you prepare yourself. Because when we're in a state of anxiety, we just kind of word vomit, right? We're like, that, I don't really know what to say, right? Or maybe you just let the emotion take over. The emotion speaks for you. And that emotion could be frustration. You're like, I don't know why I'm still single, kind of fly off, right? But instead, what you can do is, you can just tap into yourself, reflect upon what you want to say, recite it, and then when the opportunity comes, you can more calmly say, I'm choosing to focus on myself right now.
Uh-huh.
I'm actually dating some people that I think might be interesting. Maybe next holiday season will be an opportunity for you to meet,
Yeah.
you know?
I do remember used to think, okay, what is like some sassy, witty remark that I can kind of like jab back at them when they ask this question? What are some responses that they could use? Could you give us some suggestions?
Yeah, I mean, I think, anything that feels authentic for sure, for the person would be, most beneficial. I think something that could be helpful to say without feeling like you need to be forced to overshare or be forced to, go into a place that feels like very uncomfortable is just saying, I'm looking into some options, and when I think that there's somebody worthwhile presenting to the family, I'll bring them over, and
Yeah.
that eases, because sometimes the thing about the questions that you get is like people feeling anxious for you, right?
Mm.
You might be like, we want to see them happy. We want to see her happy, right? Not understanding that I'm already happy. I'm just like looking for somebody that's cool and that I can vibe with, and that can be happy with me, right? But I think I'm being selective, and I really want that person to be the right person, and so I'll bring them along when I can. But out of that state of anxiety and for wanting you to be happy, sometimes parents, siblings, aunts, uncles, cousins, friends, neighbors, they may ask these questions, and so you being able to answer in that way offers an opportunity to ease their anxiety while also easing your own, right? Because it's to the point, but it's pretty vague, and it leaves you opportunity and flexibility to just be wherever
Yeah.
you are and not like overshare if you don't want
Yeah.
to, right? Some people
Yeah.
feel right oversharing, and they're like, well, I dated this one guy, but it seems like we weren't interested in the same things, and I just couldn't spend more time focusing on that part.
Right. Right.
And
Right.
that's okay too.
Yeah, I love what you said, which is it has to feel authentic to all of us for actually doing the response. I think that is the most important thing. So if you don't feel like oversharing, don't feel pressure to overshare. Um, One thing, just to share ideas, I think people can, our listeners can try on different things to see what feels right for them.
Mm-hmm.
I always found a little bit of humor, especially if I didn't really feel like getting into some serious over conversation, or a little bit of humor always helped. And so sometimes I would say things like, well, yeah, I'm still single because you didn't introduce me to anyone. Like, what do you have for me? Or something like that. Do your job. and turn it to that. Or sometimes, depending on the person, if I did feel like sharing, I would actually share more. But, I think all of these ideas are great for the listeners to try, and we can land on something that really feels genuine to us.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would really recommend, like after an interaction like that, for anybody to, again, with the cope ahead strategy, right? So you plan this ahead. If you were to get a question like that or encounter a situation or a conversation that might make you feel uncomfortable, even if you're like, a third party in the conversation, right? But it just kind of spurs something within you about your dating life, then it might be a good idea to just like fraction out like a space. Maybe it's the bathroom if you're like in someone else's home, like wherever you may be, and just like distract the mind for just a
Mm.
few minutes. It may be like
Mhm.
you watching like a funny clip, or you being able to just like text a friend that was like on speed dial, or speed text, to just let them know, oh gosh, the question came up. I feel really crappy right now. I just wanted to let somebody know just so that I can share this moment, right? And
Mhm.
it's like strategies to kind of like give yourself an opportunity to just decompress from the experience that you just had.
Yeah. I'm curious. I think these are really great ways for us to prepare, moments that could be stressful. I'm wondering, of course, in an ideal world, if I can control my own emotion, the ideal situation is that I don't actually feel anxiety or stress around this. And there's none of that, and then I can just show up and enjoy this special time with my family and friends.
Yeah.
Wondering if there's anything I can do to not only just cope with anxiety, but like not feel anxious.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and anxiety is a tricky emotion because anxiety is an emotion that is also pretty adaptive, and so it's built hardwired into us for the reason of also protecting us. So sometimes it's a little bit hard to get rid of altogether, at all. But it is possible to diminish one's anxiety, especially in these kinds of circumstances, and especially just overall within the holiday season. Engaging in a practice that is grounding is something that is one of the most beneficial ways to reduce anxiety, especially because anxiety sometimes has to do with like hyperarousal, and your body's like, it's like really, overstimulated with worry and the experience of fear. That's what underlies anxiety. So what are you people of? Someone asking you the question and maybe like saying it in front of everyone and embarrassing you, that sort of thing. It's all about fear and worry. So grounding definitely helps, especially in the moment, especially when anxiety catches you off guard. And some of the ways that a person can ground, one of the most beneficial ways and easiest ways and free ways of grounding is through the breath. And through deep breathing, you can actually calm your nervous system, which will calm that hyper-aroused state that you tend to feel when you're anxious. And the recommended amount of time to do this is for 5 minutes straight at the very minimum in order to bring yourself into a more neutral state. So that's one way that is really, really helpful, beneficial, and actually effective. And then there's the grounding through the 5 senses. So sometimes people pick one thing or 5 things, but it's usually, 5 things that you can see and 4 things that you can hear and 3 things that you can smell and 2 things you can taste, and 1 thing that you can touch. And so just like really being able to bring yourself into a present-centered state that's very mindfully placed in the senses and in everything that you have around you that can actually capture your attention rather than your attention being in that anxious thinking loop. So those are like 2 main things that can be really helpful. And the third is really more about thoughts, right? It's about engaging your thoughts. So what am I afraid of right now? And just like really like talking to yourself as if you were your own best friend. What's the fear? And answering that and being able to really get at the crux of, what's holding you in worry and what's holding you in anxiety.
That reminds me sometimes, I would, and this didn't have to just do with dating, but sometimes if I have some concerns or I'm finding myself feeling anxious, I would actually literally talk out loud in front of a mirror, and vocalize and have conversation with myself, which sometimes I know that can sound crazy. I would just say, "Hi, Dawoon, how are you? How are you feeling? Okay, you're feeling this, you're feeling anxious. Like, why?" You kind of, literally what you said, and I say it out loud so I can hear myself and I have conversation with myself. And almost always the outcome is, somehow I found a way to either make me feel better, or end up in a situation where there was some creative solution that I didn't really think about the problem. And so I do really enjoy having conversation on my own, and I find it helpful if I vocalize it versus doing it in my head.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, I actually think it's quite healthy, to be able to do that. And, Issa Rae has actually normalized that for all of us, I think, through her show Insecure, where she basically talks to herself or raps to herself in the mirror, and it's so comical and it's like such an adequate reflection of reality. I think who can say that they've been in front of a mirror and have been reciting some song that feels, like it actually speaks to them and is saying it like, "You go girl," to themselves. And I think it's just such a healthy way of engaging yourself and, speaking to yourself from a place of compassion and love and even humor. And
Right.
it can be, something that can also be really helpful. I mean, even as a strategy, to do, like, even prior to going out, maybe even prior to engaging with a person for the first time that you've been meeting on the app, and you're just like, first go around, actually meeting maybe in person, socially distanced, and, doing something like that in the mirror can really loosen you up and remove some of the stress and tension that you're probably holding on to, about, the jitters of, like, meeting a person.
Right. Yeah. I remember I actually used to do that right before going on a date, and I would just, like, before I walk out, I would, like, look at myself in the mirror and say, like, wow, you look great, or whatever, And that always made it made myself, like, laugh, and
Yeah.
it helped with the jitters, like you said.
Definitely.
And I know it could feel awkward if you haven't tried it, like, for those of you who are listening. But if you haven't tried it, I really highly recommend that you try. And of course, if it doesn't feel good, then you can try other strategies. But um, I know sometimes I get, comments from daters like, oh, that feels a little bit artificial. Like, shouldn't I kind of know how to be myself? And I think being yourself is, of course, the most important thing, but sometimes, like, those anxiety and all that stuff gets in the way of us being able to be ourselves in front of other people. And so these are the ways you can actually help unlock you relax so that you could be yourself.
Absolutely.
I love that. In terms of breathing technique, is it, if I'm breathing for 5 minutes, am I just kind of like taking deep breath in, like, through the nose and then out through is there some special technique that we should be using?
Oh, so glad you asked that. Yeah. So there are so many, not that many, but there have been a variety of different techniques that have been utilized that have been effective. However, I tend to stick to the breathing in through your nose, breathing out through your mouth. That's a standard right there. And in through the nose, typically for about 5 seconds, and out through the mouth for typically about 7 seconds. And the purpose here really is to just slow down the breath. So it may start off with you because, especially with anxiety, you're going to be experiencing shallow breathing. Even if you're not aware of it, the breath actually constricts. And so you may only be able to take in 2 to 3 seconds of an in-breath, right? And then just maybe like 2 or 3 seconds of an out-breath. And so that's why it's recommended for you to try it for about 5 minutes or so that by that 5th minute, you're actually in a flow. And that flow is actually slowing down your heart rate, it's actually increasing your oxygen intake, and it's actually regulating your breath. And so because it's a practice, it's not like a one and done, right? It's something that requires for you to extend it for a period of time of 5 minutes or more. However, with the goal of maybe it being 5 seconds in and then 7 seconds out. Some people find it really helpful to do the 4-4-4-4, which is, following the square where they inhale for 4, exhale for 4, inhale for 4, and they find that actually breathing through geometry is something that's helpful and stimulating also, through the eyesight, which can be a healthy distraction. So there's so many variations of this, but I usually stick to the 5-7 rule.
Great. So once again, I think there are many, many different things that we could try. I highly, highly recommend you to try one of these, whether it's the 4-4-4-4 box breathing or the 5-7 breathing. And then I think you should be able to land on whatever works for you. And same goes for what did you call it? The 5-7 senses? The 5 senses?
Oh, yeah. Grounding through the 5 senses. Yeah.
Right. So that one is, we just focus on whatever sense that's coming at us, whether it's sight or smell, things like that.
Focus on all 5, and if you can, focus on one at a time. Like if you're focusing on your eyes at a time, so the sense of sight, focusing on 5 things that you can see. Like, through the reflection right now, I can see that, my mirror, my little sun mirror is in the back. My plants is another thing that I see. My paint my mirror, my larger mirror. So there's so many things that I see, and so I'm constantly attending to those things and being very presently mindful. And then I can transition into what are the things that I smell. I baked cookies today, so I still smell cookies, right? And so I'm focusing on that piece rather than, oh my gosh, they just asked me that question. I don't know how to answer. That was so embarrassing. We're shifting the mind into focusing on the present state and the senses and grounding through the five senses.
Right. I'm curious, what is the science behind how this works? Why does it calm our mind down to focus on our senses or our breath?
Well, the more and more of the science is telling us in terms of the mindfulness piece, the holistically mindfulness piece, that the more that we focus on mindfulness and mindful meditation, the more that we can actually contribute to the restructuring of our minds, especially the mind that is, very highly activated by intense emotions. But any mind, right? Whether you're somebody that already, it flows through life with, just kind of low-level emotions or mid-level emotions, or if you're like really high on emotions, it still can be very useful and effective. And so we're seeing that there are actual scientific facts connected to brain plasticity that actually also, connects to the mindfulness practices that we engage in. That mindfulness is actually helping us to restructure our minds.
Restructure our brain.
Restructure our brain. So like actual restructuring of especially the emotion centers of our brain. And so, so that's the science mostly behind it. And the science behind the breath is one that ties into the central nervous system. So when our nervous system experiences the experience of a threat meaning, oh my gosh, that question might be asked tonight, that could be a threat, it goes into fight or flight mode. And basically what happens is that in fight or flight mode, the central nervous system activates the sympathetic nervous system, which is our activating nervous system that basically tells us there's threat in the environment, you must constrict all of the non-essential functions in order to actually engage, be prepared to fend off the threat or attack. And so that's why our breath becomes constricted. That's why we experience heart palpitations or tachycardia. That's why there's chest constriction, and all of our essential functions, including our gastrointestinal tract, actually becomes constricted and has lessened function. And so when what happens with the sympathetic nervous system is that once the threat is no longer there, the parasympathetic nervous system, which is the other side of that, comes in and calms down all of that and actually restores all of the bodily functions so that we can breathe normally, and that our hearts are at a normal heart rate, and so our gastro tract is processing the food that we ate again, and so all of that. And so the breath actually helps us to elicit the parasympathetic nervous system and tell it, hey, I'm actually feeling like there's a threat. I need you to come in and save the day and like help me, bring me down, into the neutral state. So that's why the breath can actually help with that, because the breath is a parasympathetic nervous system function.
Right, that makes sense. And I heard that the flight or fight mode, the sympathetic system, actually, our body is physically not capable of having both of those systems on. Like you can't feel, rest and relaxation and flight or fight at the same time. And so when one is on, the other is off. And so by breath work, we turn on the rest and relaxation kind of mode, and that would turn off automatically the fight or flight mode.
Definitely. Like if you remember like old school TV or like cartoons, like when someone would like be in a panic, they would give them like a brown paper bag and they would breathe into it like really hard. Like that's basically like in essence the same function. Like breathing deeply in and out actually brings in the parasympathetic nervous system into activation mode, and it actually overrides the sympathetic nervous system.
Great. Let's change the situation a little bit. We talked a lot about the holiday gatherings and how do we actually, not feel anxiety and maybe even feel great so that we can enjoy the time with our loved ones. What about situations where now we're going to be, because it's colder, we're going to be spending more time at home. So there is a lot of alone time. And with COVID this year, interestingly, that's an additional complexity. It is harder to meet up with people. Are there any other, I think the similar, some of the techniques that you suggested, I'm sure we can apply here, but any coping mechanism here that that you could suggest specific to, how do we spend, time on our own?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think spending time on our own, it's something that we can embrace because it can actually bring about a lot of positives if we're able to see it from that perspective, and if we find it like challenging to be able to see it from that perspective, it might be worthwhile actually reflecting upon that and journaling about that. Why is it so hard for me to sit alone in a space or sit with my own thoughts or enjoy my own company? And there's something to say about that because I know that some relationship experts definitely do speak to the fact that, if you can't be a good friend to yourself, then how can you be a good friend to a partner, right? Or to anybody. Mm-hmm. And so it could be an opportunity to engage in befriending yourself and getting to know yourself better and even getting to know the post-2020 version of yourself, because we've been through so much in this year that it might be worthwhile, getting to reflect upon, like, who have you become after all of this 2020, chaos, right? Mm-hmm. And it's definitely, something that could be worthwhile reframing, and taken into consideration from that angle. However, we are communal people. We're not meant to be in isolation. And that's why, like, one of the greatest punishments within our society is solitary confinement, because it really is a very harsh way to exist. And so we've gotten a bit of a flavor of that. And we all know it's awful, right? It's hard to be in isolation for an extended period of time without knowing when it's going to end. And so some of the things that, people can do is to practice what we call distress tolerance, right? And distress tolerance can actually help you to tolerate the distress of the unknown, not knowing when this is going to end. And sometimes you can do that, by just doing things that, like the parasympathetic techniques that we talked about, but also, doing things that can actually elicit opposite emotion in you. So if the emotion that you're experiencing is loneliness and sadness, then perhaps what you might want to do is engage in community in your own space, right? Just yesterday, I had 3 hours of conversations with people, and it was so beautiful and so filling, and people that were nowhere near me, and it was so exciting to, just like vibe with somebody and just, engage in conversation about poetry, and, it was 11/11, so there were some conversations about that, and it was just like really filling. And at the same time, I really enjoyed that I got to come back from those conversations and be in my space with my doggy and just wind down, and just appreciate the fact that that's something that was, in my life. So being able to bring in community is something that can be regulating and helpful, in whatever form you can do so. However, being able to also check in with yourself about, how it is that you're experiencing loneliness, and if it's actually triggering anything within you, and being able to give yourself, the experience of joy and a hug and anything that, like the cookies that I made today, anything that can, bring you some element of joy and give you the opposite emotion of what you're experiencing can be something that can be helpful.
I really like this. It's called distress tolerance, and that's about inviting opposite emotion.
Yeah, well, one of the techniques of distress tolerance is that inviting opposite emotion, although there are so many others that more so tie into the, eliciting parasympathetic response. There's progressive muscle relaxation, which is like constricting and tightening up all of the muscles in your body one by one group by one group, like all the muscles in the neck and all the muscles in the back, and all the muscles in your gut area. And you constrict them for a couple of seconds, and you let them go, and that offers you a sense of release, or releases the tension that's been captured in the muscles. And so that's one of the, techniques. There's the paced breathing that we talked about. There's also eliciting different temperatures within your body. Like maybe you could eat a really cold ice cream, or maybe you could hold an ice cube, on your hands, and that can be a distracting, technique. Or maybe taking a really warm bath, right? Like these are all temperature regulating techniques that are also a part of the parasympathetic response. So there's just an enormous amount of techniques that fall under that category, but that can
Wow.
be.
I've never heard of those. I'm super excited to try them myself, and very, very excited to have introduced to our daters all these techniques that we can all try. Not only at any time of the year, it doesn't have to be even holiday, any time when we're feeling a little bit off or anxious or whatnot. These are really great things to try. I'm definitely going to try the inviting the opposite emotion one. So thank you for sharing that. On reframing the mind, I love the questions that you asked, which is like, why is it that it's so difficult for me to be sitting alone? I think those are such great questions that we rarely ask ourselves. And I want to share my personal experience. I think one of the reasons why, when I think back, like, why was it so hard for me to, especially during the holiday time, like, be alone? I think there was some underlying assumption on my part, that somehow if I'm in any kind of relationship, I was going to be happier than, when I'm on my own. And it was completely shattered, through my one very, very bad, relationship experience that I managed to get out. And that experience really taught me, wow, it is not any relationship that actually is going to make me happy. I am so much happier being on my own. And I just developed this conviction that if I'm going to be in a relationship, it has to be something freaking amazing, because otherwise this is what I have is so much better. And that experience, and I think it almost was a reframing of my mind, really helped me, feel better and not feel, sadness around, where I was in terms of my relationship status. And so I think those are really, really important questions for us to ask.
I love that so much. I wish that, so many people could hear that story, especially because befriending yourself can be something so incredibly positive and so filling. And, like I mentioned before, like it's so much more rewarding when you can step into a relationship already feeling full, and the person just compliments you, right? And
Right.
can, rather than fills you or makes you feel complete. And so it's just a beautiful, way to help us illustrate that, idea, through your very own story. I love that so much.
Oh yeah, thank you, thank you. It definitely kind of goes back to, like, having conversation with yourself again. Like, if it is super fun to actually be talking to yourself like this in a mirror. So I highly, highly suggest that everyone try it. Okay, so while the time flew by, I'm going to move on to a section where we're going to be asking you some questions from the audience. We polled some questions that they wanted to ask you and our daters, and there are so many great questions. I'm really excited to learn myself. There was a lot of questions around mental health, obviously, and one question was, one dater said, I have depression, and I'm wondering when is the right time for me to tell my date about the fact that I have depression.
Mm-hmm. I think that more and more we're starting to realize that depression, anxiety, and any of the mental health conditions that are in the spectrum of mental wellness or unwellness are starting to become more common dialogue, just the same as many of the physical health conditions have been in the past and in the present. And so it's something that I think collectively as a society we're destigmatizing more and more, which makes it so that I think it becomes a more acceptable and more easily digestible conversation for a person to receive and to be able to react to in a way that is affirming and positive, rather than from a position of, creating distress for you. So, I would always say, it's important for a person to ensure that they themselves feel comfortable with this other person that they're dating or with their partner before disclosing anything at all, right? Because you're putting yourself in a vulnerable position. And also thinking about that whole like coping ahead process, it really applies here too. It may be worthwhile to cope ahead and create a cope ahead plan. Like, well, what will I do if this conversation, feels affirming? What will I do if the conversation does not? And follow through on your plan, right? Like if my plan is to leave there and, go and head home and have a bubble bath, then make sure that you follow through on that. Don't plop on bed and like have your, sob moment, or if you need to do that, have it for a moment and then just like hop in that bath and give yourself the self-care that you need that you didn't receive in the conversation. However, I think it's, intuitively you will know. And it's a matter of also understanding that not everyone understands depression well. So if you have an understanding of depression that you would like to relate to this person, it might be a good time to do that as well, to just offer further destigmatization of the conversation around depression and offer them an opportunity to further understand that part of you, because it's only a part of you. It's not.
Yeah. I love that coping mechanism, like just kind of planning ahead. I think this applies really well here too, because we don't know how the other person is going to respond. And then in terms of timing, intuitively, I agree. Like, it really depends on the person. And if you're feeling like compelled to share, and if you're thinking about, maybe I should be sharing, that probably is your body telling you it is the right time to share. Has been my experience. So I think trusting your intuition would be really good here. What about the other side? How can I be verbally supportive when my date mentions that they're struggling with something or, something like depression?
Love that. Being able to offer a listening ear is something that can be really helpful. It sounds super basic, but it's really helpful and effective to just be present for a person, right? And listen to what their specific experience of anxiety or depression or anything else may be, because it could be pretty unique. It could very well be that the person, might say, hey, listen, I have winter blues and winter's coming. And I suspect that there may be moments when I experience, my mood shift, and it's very well connected to circadian rhythms and, the lack of sunlight that we're getting and all of those things. And them being able to elaborate upon that and how that experience is for them is something that you can be more attuned to if you just lend a listening ear. So, doing something as basic and as effective and powerful as active listening is one of the best strategies that you can engage in addition to also affirming and validating. So the other side of that is the validation, saying, that must be really hard, and how can I support you through that moment or through those?
I love that. I'm going to look at a few questions that actually came in during our conversation. We don't have a ton of time, so I'm going to try to pick the best one here. What is the best way to get back into the dating game after a long break?
Wow. Good one. There it is. So being able to reflect on your long break and whatever it is that you've been able to learn about yourself. I think long breaks are really healthy. I myself have been taking, a break from having been in a relationship, and I do that every time that, I'm no longer in a situation with someone, because it offers me an opportunity to reflect on what did I learn in that situation? How did I, evolve within it? How am I evolving after that situation? And how can I, create a situation moving forward with someone that can bring the best parts of me that came out of the lessons that I learned while I was, in the previous relationships. And so being able to, offer yourself a moment of reflection that can be expanded. It can be a number of journal entries. It can be, having conversations with people that you trust about your journey, and just anything that can actually get the words out so that you have a very concrete reflection of who you are in this moment now and what makes it so that you are, ready and prepared for the next phase of your dating.
I think the common theme that I'm hearing is just being very proactive, whatever the situation is, whether it's going to a party or whether it's like going back into dating, just be reflective and proactive about charting your own path versus being on, autopilot mode and just kind of like see where things take you is what I'm hearing. And I think that is a really effective way. I remember when I was getting back to dating after that hard relationship that I went through, I actually wrote rules for myself. This is the type of relationship that I want, and I'm going to, one really big rule that I wanted to remind myself is that I'm going to commit myself to this relationship that I just designed. I'm not going to commit myself to a person. And so if this person is not going to give me this relationship, I'm not going to be committed to this one because I'm committed to this relationship.
Right.
And so whatever the rule is, just after the reflection, I think some of the things that's what come up that's going to help you navigate the dating world better. So I love that tip. Okay, let's do one more. What about this one? How do you start working on intimacy issues to help be a better partner?
Well, that's beautiful. It's important to be able to, work on. I mean, it's important to understand what you mean by intimacy issues, right? Because that can mean a host of things. So being able to really understand what it is that is presenting as a challenge in your intimacy world, and what makes it an issue, and what are some viable solutions that you can think of on your own, because we have innate problem-solving qualities within ourselves that I think, we can tap into. And trying to elicit some of those strategies, to problem solve ahead. However, it's important to, I believe that it can be helpful to open up the channels of communication about whatever intimacy challenges are there that you may have, so that your partner can be equipped to also meet you halfway. Because it's not just about you, resolving all the intimacy issues that, are there, and then coming, into the relationship like with everything absolved. I am healed, I'm good, now let's get to work, right? It's actually, it can be a really profound and beautiful experience when you have someone that is willing and is patient with you, to also help you through the process of whatever is happening that is bringing about that challenge.
I love that. Well, thank you, Mariel, for joining us. I learned so much techniques myself that I really want to try. And I think this will really help our daters prepare themselves proactively about how they want to create, what kind of holiday kind of year-end experience they want to create for themselves and for the people around them. I asked one question to all my daters, all my guests. What is the best dating advice that you've ever received?
Ooh. The best dating advice. Now I have to tap into everything that my sister's ever said. She is my dating guru. I don't know where she gets these ideas, but she's incredible. An innate relationship expert. I remember her telling me that no matter what situation I go into, that I am worthy. And I think that that's something that can be a global affirmation that we can all apply to ourselves. Like, no matter what, no matter who you come in contact with, no matter what they say about you, no matter whether or not, they have the capacity to affirm you or to see the beauty in you, like you're still worthy. And so being able to remember that very simple affirmation that I hope really sticks and can be useful and self-sustaining and keeping up that energy and that self-esteem that we all need when it comes to navigating the dating space.
Beautiful. Beautiful. If they want to keep in touch with you, where can they find you?
So the best way to find me is definitely through my website. I have, some offerings on there and some ways to get in touch, which is www.drmarielbuquet.com. And also on IG, I'm at dr.marielbuquet. So those are the two main ways of being able to get in touch.
Thank you so much, Mariel, and everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in this week. All the resources and techniques that Mariel mentioned will be summarized on coffeemeetsbagel.com, Coffee Meets Bagel's blog, which is coffeemeetsbagel.com/blog. I will see everyone next week. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.